All right, we're Kuf Daled Amud Beis 104b. Looking at the widest set of lines, and you count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. Go towards the end. Sela or Sila. Sila.
Sila Ko?
Yes. So continuing our discussion and reading of Eicha, the Book of Lamentations. We're still in the first chapter, but we skipped quite a few verses. At the beginning, we were doing every single word of the first verse, and then the second verse, but then it starts skipping. And now we're at chapter 1, verse 15, where the verse reads, Sila kol abiri Hashem bekirbi. It has crushed all the great men of God within me. Talking about the city of Yerushalayim, the city of Jerusalem is speaking still, and says all the great men of God have been crushed within me, within the city. So comments the Gemara. What does this mean by crushed? Where'd they go? So says the Gemara. Kadam. Here. Says the Gemara, Kadam, this is like a person, which tells his friend, Nifsila, this coin is out of circulation. In other words, it's a has-been. So crushed, and not, I guess the Gemara is saying, not in the literal sense, but more in the prestige in the world, and that they used to be like the people you reckoned with. This is the top dollar, and now it's a has-been. Nobody uses that coin anymore. Nobody reckons with these great people of Yerushalayim. Okay.
It's like taking the root Sila, and you correct with Pisal. Rashi does that. So the two letters are the same, the Samach and the
Samach and Lamed.
But there's different,
Okay. The next verse we're reading from Eicha is now the very next verse. So it's verse 16.
It's actually the next chapter.
Oh, sorry, chapter 2, 16.
Yeah,
I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, the pay 9, the orders of verse.
Yeah.
That's right.
So we mentioned way back.
Yeah, exactly.
2:16 Book of Lamentations, Eicha. So we mentioned back that the Eicha, a lot of it is written where the first word of the verses begin with the letter of Aleph Beis in order. First verse with the letter Aleph, the second with the Beis, the third with the Gimel, and so on. And the Gemara said then that this was because they've abandoned Torah written with Aleph Beis. So the book is written in Aleph Beis. Like much of Tehillim, where different chapters have the same thing, where the first letter of each verse is consecutively the next letter in the alphabet. But in chapter 2, when it comes to the letter Pei, the verse opens up with the words, Patsu Alecha Piem. They've opened up their mouths about you. In other words, people have been mocking you, the Jewish people. So the Gemara asks like this. Amar Rava says, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, B'shvil ma hiktim pei la'ayin. Why does the letter pei precede the letter ayin? Even though in the order of the alphabet you have samach, ayin, then pei. But Rashi actually comments, not just here, but in many of the verses in Eicha. He says the Roiv, he says the majority. In most of the orders of the Aleph Beis in Eicha, the letter pei comes before the ayin. It's the only letters that are out of order. And the Gemara is asking, or Rava is asking, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, why? So Rabbi Yechanan explained, and Rava is delivering this message, Bishvil Meraglim, because this goes back to the spies. We opened this whole discussion, we compared, or we put the issue of the spies in line with the destruction of the first and second temple. That was the first time, in some ways, the Jews rejected Hashem's project of dwelling in the land of Israel, which we explained on the Hasidic level earlier. So going back to the spies, that's why the letter Pei comes before the letter Ayin. How's that? Because the letter Pei, here it's spelled with Pei Aleph, but actually it can be spelled with Pei Hey. And that's a word, which is Peh, a mouth. And the letter Ayin, spelled Ayin Yud Nun, spells a word, which means eye. So two different parts of the face. Eye versus mouth. So usually the ayin comes before the pei. The eye comes before the mouth. First you analyze and assess the situation, then you speak. But the spies did the reverse. They spoke in their mouth, that which they have not seen with their eyes. In other words, they had preconceived notions. And therefore they spoke not based on what they've assessed and analyzed, but what they wanted to say. And this is the rule in life. The ayin comes before the pei. Eyes, analysis comes before the mouth. It's kind of similar to what we're, not exactly, but kind of similar to what we were saying before about listening to somebody else share their grief. First comes the ears, then comes the mouth. So similarly here, eyes come first. First do an analysis, first be impartial, first be objective before you inject your own view. First be impartial to it, see what's truly going on, and then give an honest review and honest analysis, as opposed to
speech.
Thought, speech, then action. Not speech, then thought, and then action.
Right.
Or action, then speech, then... Yeah. And the mistake of the Meraglim, of course, was that they delivered the message because that's what they wanted to deliver, even before they've done a proper analysis of the truth, that this is a country Hashem wants us to be in, etc. Okay. Now we have another verse in Eicha. Tehillim actually. Tehillim 14:4. This lends very great weight to what we talked about yesterday as Klippa being a parasite. As negative spiritual forces, as that which is ungodly, siphoning its energy from the godly. So the verse says like this in Tehillim: Oichle ami ochlu lechem. Those who eat, it could be read, those who eat within my people. Or it could be read, those who eat my people, as in those who oppress the people. It says, Oichle ami means the eaters of my people. So it could be eaters within the people, like amongst you people who are eaters, are eating bread. But it could also mean those who eat my people, God speaking. Those who eat my people, in other words, those who oppress the Jewish people. So let's read it that way, which is what the Gemara intends to do. Oichle ami, those who eat my people, those who oppress my people. Achlu lechem are eating bread. Hashem lekaro, they do not call out to God. Okay? So what does this mean? Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Rava said in Rabbi Yechanan. Kol ha'oichel malachman shel Yisrael, anyone who eats the bread of the Jewish people, Tayim tam lechem, that's the person who tastes the taste of bread. She'ein ha'oichel malachman shel Yisrael, one who does not eat from the bread of Israel, ein tayim tam lechem, does not taste bread. In other words, the simple reading is that the true joy of eating, of prosperity, is only when it's taken from the Jew. They can earn their own money and their own livelihood in some way, but they don't get as much joy out of it. They're not truly eating bread until they're eating the bread of the Jewish people. That's the simple reading. It's a kind of adding insult to injury in terms of the oppression Jews are going through. It's not just that people are eating your bread, but it's the only way they're going to enjoy themselves if they do take it from you. So it's kind of like a program that they're bugged to go take bread from you. That's the literal meaning. But if we're going to connect it to the way we talked about before, as Klippa being a parasite of the Jewish people, and divine energy comes into this world, divine energy is Kadosh, obviously, is holy, and therefore comes through the Jew into this world. So, and therefore, the only way in which everything else in this world gets its life force is through the Jew. In other words, everybody eats their bread, everybody gets their life force through the bread of the Jew. So either happens in one of two ways. Either it happens because the Jew takes the lead in the positive way, becoming the moral leader of the world, and therefore everybody gets their bread, everybody gets their divine sustenance through the Jew in a healthy, proper way, because that's the Jewish job, to bring godliness into this world. Or it happens in a perverse way, where the Jew takes his godly soul that he has and drags it into a negative place, into a place of Klippa, and then everybody else becomes the parasite eating bread off the Jew. In other words, you can take the Gemara quite literally. You can't eat bread unless you're eating the Jew's bread. In other words, divine life force comes into this world through the Jew, either in a good way or in a negative way. Like
Well,
Hashem,
it all comes through us in a positive way. It's how they're eating the bread is through either a positive or a negative way.
so that could be true that's true. In other words, God can make it so that the people around us eat our bread in a negative sense, but it's also internal. In other words, if a Jew is projecting holiness, then he is choosing to feed the world in a positive way. If he is not projecting holiness, then he's taking the holiness he has with him and dragging it into a negative place of klippah. And thus he is feeding a parasite, if you will, by misappropriating the holiness he's been granted. Following?
Following, but I'm interpreting it a different way.
Go both ways. I think it can be both ways.
Yeah, I'm interpreting it that we bring godliness down
Into this
world, and we are the provider of bread, and how they eat the bread or how they acquire the bread is either through negative or positive. But we only
that's Hashem's choice, really.
Yeah.
In other words, Hashem can choose that. But in terms of our choice, we can also choose how we want to be how we want to be that conduit. In other words, you're assuming that we are bringing that holiness into this world in a healthy, positive way. Which is a good assumption to have.
Yeah, we're bringing this holiness into the world.
Right.
We're the outlet in the wall.
Yeah.
What someone decides to plug into it is something else.
Then there's our choice also. In other words, if I decide to take the life that I've been granted and the holiness that comes along with it and misbehave, then I'm taking that holiness to feed a parasite.
No, like we're supposed
Spiritually
to be
speaking.
the right source, as you mentioned, but sometimes the Jews don't meet the mission. So therefore, you have the negative.
You still have that holiness, but you're bringing it into a negative place.
Actually bring it
Right?
into
This is what actually it's in today's Tanya. We quote that the Rishayim, those who are wicked b'chayayim in their life, Kriyim Mesim are called dead.
That's of course a Gemara.
Yeah. Why? So explains Chassidus. Why is that? Sorry, it's not a pasuk. It's Chazal based on a pasuk. But why is that? For that reason, is a parasite even when it's alive, and precisely because of its life, it's slowly killing itself. Right? So a Jew taking all the potent divine energy he's been given and misusing it in his behavior ends up feeding a parasite in the deepest way because he has that deepest sense of holiness in him, potentially. Okay. And in that vein, it actually connects to the next statement. Because I think without this explanation we just gave, the next statement seems to be unrelated to the previous statement. Right? Because the Gemara now analyzes the next part of the verse. The verse reads, "Those who eat the Jewish bread eat bread, and those who don't, the only way to eat bread is if you're eating the Jewish bread." That's the first part of the verse. The next part of the verse is they don't call out to God. Lekaro, Hashem lekaro, they don't call out to Hashem. So who is these people that are not calling out to Hashem? So without the next line of the Gemara, you would assume it's talking about those people who are eating the Jews' bread. That's the way it seemed to be going. Those who eat, the only way to eat Jewish bread, the only way to eat bread is if you eat from the Jew. And then the verse goes on to say, they're not calling out to God. Who's the they? You would assume it's talking about the people who are eating the Jewish bread. That they're not calling out to God. They're not recognizing where it comes from, if you will. That's what you would assume. But the Gemara doesn't say it that way. The Gemara says like this. Hashem lekaro, they're not calling out to God. So Rav said, Elu Adayanan, this is judges, Jewish judges, who are corrupting their position as being Jewish judges, and therefore not calling out to God in their judgment. Shmuel says, these are school children, school teachers, teachers of students, of Jewish children, who are misappropriating their position as being teachers and not calling out to God, as it were, not transmitting the word of God to their students.
It's not being their calling, you say in English.
Not meeting their calling, yeah. But based on what we said, it makes perfect sense. In other words, it continues right along. The reason why there's other nations who are capable of eating the Jews' bread is because the Jews themselves, especially judges and teachers, who have that, all Jews have that holiness in them. But a teacher and a judge who has been mandated with not just spreading this holiness that they have amongst the world, but giving that holiness to the Jews That's the judge's job, to bring the Torah to the rest of the Jewish people, and the Jews to everybody else. Same thing with teachers. Teachers meant to bring that holiness to their students, and then the students can bring it to the rest of the world. So when they're misappropriating their position as teachers for children or teachers of Torah to the rest of the people, and they're not calling out to God, as it were, right? They're misappropriating the holiness they've been granted. Then other nations are eating our bread as a parasite, instead of in a healthy way. So I think based on what we said, these two lines actually merge very seamlessly. Is that clear somehow? Okay. This ends the Gemara's analyzation of the verses in Eicha. Now the Gemara gets to back to the beginning, which is the list of people who don't have a share in the world to come. And we had 3 kings and 4 commoners. Now the Gemara is going to say something that is unbelievable. It's amazing. We're just going to translate it as it is because it requires, of course, lots of explanation, and I'm putting some thought into it. I don't have anything yet, but the floor is open. Gemara says like this: Mi monon. Who came up with this list? Who decided these 3 kings and these 4 commoners don't get to share in the world to come? Amar Rav Ashi said, Anshei Knesset Gdola, the men of the Great Assembly. The men of the Great Assembly, of course, are listed in the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Avos, when the Mishnah lists the generations that received the Torah, until finally came to Anshei Knesset Gdola, which began the Mishnaic era in some way. So they're the ones that compiled this list. Okay? And we have the last 5 pages to justify why they came to this conclusion. So, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav, Bikshu Oid Limnois Echad. The men of the Great Assembly want to add one more person to the list. Who would you guess that would be? Don't say. Who would you guess that one more person would be from Scripture that they wanted to add to the list?
As a person who's not going to get
Yeah.
a place in the world to come.
King Solomon. They wanted to add King Solomon? Amazing. I suppose because, the Gemara Rashi doesn't explain why, but I assume, given the story of Tanakh, because he married this Egyptian woman, and married many other women, and that brought idolatry into the Jewish people, essentially. So the beginning of the process we talked about before, where the Jews are a split kingdom, and there's people rampant idol worship, really begins with King Solomon's treaty with Egypt and marrying this woman there, along with the fact that he had too many horses against too many wives, which is a violation of Torah law. Torah law says that a king should have not too many wives and not too many horses, and King Solomon violated both of those rules. But also, I think, because he brought this woman that brought idolatry into the Jewish people. So they wanted to add him to the list. Can you imagine that? We don't think of King Solomon in this way, but that's what the Gemara says. So why didn't he make the list? Says the Gemara like this: there appeared the image of King Solomon's father, David HaMelech, appeared before the men of the Great Assembly, and he prostrated himself, begging them, please don't add my son to the list. Which means that the Anshei Knesset Gdola, in making their list, actually had the power to make it that way in heaven. In other words, they weren't just making a list about what's going on in heaven, but they made a list that caused something to happen in heaven. And therefore, if King Solomon were to be added to the list, he wouldn't have a share in the world to come. And therefore, King David is prostrating himself, begging the men of the Great Assembly, please don't put my son on the list. They ignored him. King David comes from heaven and prostrates himself before the men of the Great Assembly. They don't pay any heed. A fire comes from heaven, and singed their benches that they're sitting on. They didn't listen to it, they ignored it. Okay, so their seats are singed by heaven. So what? We feel he belongs on the list, we're going to add him to the list anyway.
Sticking to their guns.
Sticking to their guns. Which is quite a story. Yotza Baskal, a voice from heaven emerges. Va'amra, and says, lahem, to them, pleading the case. A voice from heaven comes. It's presumably God himself, as it were, speaking, or some level of divine is communicating and telling them, making the case for why Shlomo Melech does not belong on the list. And this is the verse, quoting a verse from Mishlei.
King Solomon himself, that's interesting.
A verse from Mishlei, which King Solomon himself said, that's right.
I relate to this.
Yeah. Chazisa ish ma'ir b'malachtai. Have you seen anybody more hasty in his work? Lefnei malachim yisatzev. He shall sit amongst the kings. Bal yisatzev lefnei chashukim. He should not sit amongst those in darkened, those who are condemned. This is a verse saying Shlomo Melech is hasty in doing good work. Don't put him on the bad list. The Gemara means what the Gemara interprets to mean. To explain this verse? What it means when it says that he was hasty. What does it mean when he's hasty in his work? So God's continuing to speak, as alluded to in this verse. Mishahiktin beisi lebeisai. The one who put my home before his home. King Solomon built the temple before he built his own massive palace. Huge palace. V'loyoid. Not only that he decided to build my home before his own. King Solomon was very good. He cut this deal with the Egyptians, it's true, and he also made the economy do very, very well, and he had taxes very low, but made a lot of money nonetheless, and he used that to build a beautiful temple and a beautiful home, palace. But he did Hashem's home before his own. He built the temple first. Moreover, says the Gemara, it took him 7 years to build my home, to build the Beis HaMikdash, to build a temple. Beisai, his own home, he wasn't so enthusiastic. He showed less enthusiasm than building my home. It took 13 years, indicating his hastiness, first to make my home before his own, and then when he built my home, he did it with a whole enthusiasm. And therefore, he should be placed amongst the kings. He should not be placed amongst the condemned. This is the message that the Anshe Knesset Agdola received from heaven. And what do you think their response was? They ignored it. Yep. They're pleading a case from heaven, and they say, well, nice argument, but we still think he belongs on the list. God persists. This they accept. A voice from heaven comes out and says, a verse in Eov, Hamei imcha Yishalmena, from you is going to become a payment, as in from you is going to become retribution. Ki ma'asta, because you've become disgusted. Ki ata tivchar, you're going to choose who is disgusting and who's not disgusting. V'lo ani, and not me, says God. Now they back down. So when God is rationalizing with them, when King David is pleading with them, ignoring. But when God says, hold on a second, I've given you lots of power as the Anshe Knesset Agdola, but the buck stops here. You don't like it, therefore you get to condemn? Not the way it works. I decide who's on the list and who's not on the list. And that, the Anshe Knesset Agdola accepted. It's amazing. And here's what's even more amazing. Had they chosen not to accept this statement of Hashem, he would have been on the list, and he would have not made it to the world to come. So on the one hand, it's amazing. On the one hand, God is overriding their ruling, but at the same time, they have to make the ruling. You following
How do we know that? How do we know that? What you said?
Because the Gemara tells us
that it would have gone through as they wanted.
Oh, because otherwise,
had they rejected Hashem,
that's why the Gemara asked.
I don't understand.
That's why the Gemara asked who made the list. The Gemara's answer could have been, well, God made the list, and we're just transcribing it. The Gemara said, no, the men of the Great Assembly made the list, meaning to say it's because of the men of the Great Assembly's list that these people have been condemned such. And therefore, God's, as it were, trying to convince them not to put King Solomon on the list.
But it seems like God's last mandate was that they didn't have that power any longer.
So then start off that way. Right? Just say to begin with, look, you guys can write whatever you want on the list, I'm still putting him in the world to come. That's not what God says. God has to plead the case to them. It's incredible. It's amazing. Anyway, there's a lot to be thought about here, but that's the story. That's the story. It's quite something.
I think Hashem.
Sorry?
I could say Hashem. He likes these dialogues.
It's not the first time we have such a thing in the Gemara. That's right.
Moses did it with.
We also have in the Gemara a famous story of when Belezer became the prince of Israel. A whole story around that, And then on that day, it's a famous Gemara. There was an argument in the, I'm forgetting the names, but let's say Rabbi Shua. There was an argument in the study hall about a certain halacha. And there was one person who basically kept on doing miracles to prove that he was right. And the rest of the people were saying, well, it's very nice that you're doing these miracles, but the Torah says we follow the majority and we're the majority. So Torah's not in heaven. We decide what happens, and very nice. And then until finally a heavenly voice came out where God says, I side with that individual. And the rest of the majority said, that's very nice. But the law follows the majority, and the majority says we disagree. So the Gemara comments later, there was a sage who met Elijah the prophet later, and he asked Elijah the prophet, what was God doing at this time when he made this announcement that I follow the individual, not the majority? And the majority rejected God's opinion. So Eliyahu Navi said, God was smiling, laughing in delight, and said, my children, you've won me, you've won me. Right? So you have this idea where, the power of the Torah and all the power that comes with it has been given to man on this world, and based on man's ruling, there's law, Torah law. But as we see here, not just Torah law, but even what happens in heaven is decided by the court down here. The men of the Great Assembly are deciding who's being condemned, who's not being condemned, and God has to plead the case to them. They give in at the end because they surrender their judgment. Once God says, look, I decide, they accept. But if they still have to accept, it seems at least. Right? Which teaches, in one way it teaches, and it's something we see from the Rebbe a lot, I think I've talked about this before, this idea that the Rebbe's Avos Yisrael, his love of a fellow Jew, didn't just come out in the fact that he expressed love to every Jew and taught his Hasidim to love every Jew with Shluchim and all the rest of that. But it's also in the Rebbe's Torah. Meaning the Rebbe would teach Torah in such a way, and would always find an angle to explain whatever it is, the Gemara's, whatever story it is in Torah, to find a way where it's talking positively about Jews, not negatively about Jews. Because Torah has that power. And when Torah itself is learned in such a way that it's speaking negative about Jews, it could have that negative impact, God forbid, on those Jews. And if they would always find a way to read the verse of Torah, or to read the story in Torah, to read the Talmud in such a way that it puts the character in question in positive light. Famous story with Miriam Bas Bilga, where the Gemara talks about a certain woman that's condemned, and they would find the whole positive way to explain how even her condemnation is a positive, and all kinds of things like that. In other words, it's Malamet Zchus, but it's within Torah, using the power of Torah that Torah has to alter not just what happens in this world, but alter what happens in the spiritual world.
Because whatever you do here affects the spiritual world.
Therefore, it's
what you say equals time.
Everything a person's
when the parsha ends on a kind of a negative note, you would always
find a way that's a positive.
The title of the parsha sounded negative,
Yeah.
Time. There's a covenant with the lips. Whenever you say something even negative, it has an effect.
And often
be careful with it.
Genius twists at an angle that you never think of and give a whole positive light on something that would otherwise seem negative. So I guess this is kind of something you can take from here.
But also you can take from here what Hashem is saying, in effect, that you have the power in this world, to make halachas, but it comes to Olam Haba, that's beyond the power of Beth. He says that's what the power.
They still have the power.
No, but it seems that the Hashem says, the way he puts it at the end, it's up to me.
Yeah, he has veto power at the end.
Right, but he doesn't start with that. He doesn't start with that.
He wants them to come to. He wants them to see.
He doesn't start with that. That's right.
He wants to come to their arguments. They have valid arguments. It's true in this world. That's like a little bit Shemayim. But in the heavenly world.
But even in the heavenly world, because why were the first three kings not condemned to Olam Haba? Because they put them on the list, which is why they didn't want. In other words, if let me put it this way.
Has a veto.
Let me put it this way. Let's take God's argument up for a second.
Yeah.
Why is King David making an argument? You should tell him, okay, you put him on the list, whatever you want. I know he's fine, because God permits him to be fine. Because they have that power, it makes a difference.
They have the initial power, but I think there's a chiluk.
Of course, Hashem has veto in terms of the world.
But see, when it comes to the case of the Luba Shemaimi, Hashem laughs. It's like my sons have beat me. He doesn't apply a veto in that case.
I actually think that
there's a difference. So in this world, we have.
I think even the veto power, one could at least make the argument that the Anshe Knesset Agdil accepted.
But wait, Rashi explains that you have the power of the kilation, you don't like it, so not up to you. That's
Yeah.
actually it's not. It's like you don't have that power.
No, it shouldn't be based on that.
Yeah. So you can say maybe you have the initial to make suggestion, but
Yeah.
Hashem is a veto, but Hashem will not veto halacha.
Actually, Ash's not even saying that. Ash is actually saying
You don't have the power,
that
right?
are you the ones giving the punishment? In other words, if you put him on the list, I have to now punish him. Are you doing the punishing? I'm doing the punishing.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about who's on the list and who's not on the list. Who's on the list, they actually have the power to do. But whoever's on the list, now I'm going to have to do the punishment, God says.
But also the next Rashi, Bechir Bechir Bechem, does it depend on you? Will it be? Is it me?
Yeah,
I'd want be.
Then Bishiyesh Leichak, yeah.
It depends on Hashem. Rashi saying that's something.
Yeah, the previous Rashi seems to be a little
Yeah,
different.
Rabbi
Anyway.
clearly,
It's a very interesting Gemara, and I encourage you all to think
the
about
The punishment will be in the next world.
Yeah.
So you're giving.
So you're giving more
telling
work.
it to me,
Yeah,
the punishment, but
yeah.
I have to do it in the next world.
Exactly.
No.
No.
Because maybe in your world.
Exactly.
world
Yeah.
In your world, you're running.
Yeah,
but in my world, I exactly.
Even though, at least from King David's argument, it seems like had they put him on the list, he would have been condemned.
Yes, he would have. But Hashem can veto. But when it comes to Lech, Hashem will not veto. That's the point of the story. It says, my sons have beat me, so to
Yeah.
speak. Yes, even though by logic it'd be this way, but no, they're right. They have the majority in this world. But in the world, that's
King Solomon had no say in this whole dialogue.
That's another interesting question. Why didn't King Solomon complete his own case?
Yeah. And or do tshuva if
That's a good question, and I think
because
we have this principle actually that when a person pleads his case, he shouldn't try to raise his merits, because then they're going to open the books, and not always do you want them to open the books.
or just do tshuva then.
why can't you
Just do tshuva. In the world to come, there's no teshuva anymore. Tshuva is only in this world.
He had already passed.
Yeah, but
This is way after he passed. This is the Men of Great Assembly. This is that 100,000 years later, or 100 years
Time
later.
of the beginning of the Second Temple.
Centuries later. Not thousand, but centuries. 500 years, something like that.
Yeah.
All right. So there is
What do you
this.
mean by opening the books? Has he already been sort of adjudicated? He's been in,
Right, so, but
he's
there-
been in heaven or wherever he's been.
Yeah, but if like in other words, we say this often in Rosh Hashanah davening, we say don't do it for our sake, do it for your sake. We're saying specifically don't look at our books.
Right. That's
Do it
when
because-
we're alive, though. He's already.
Even then, we don't want that to happen, right? We always want Hashem to look at it from His perspective, His forgiving nature, rather than relying on opening books deserve, don't deserve. So maybe King Solomon was wise to say to keep quiet here and allow. In other words, if I pray on your behalf, then God doesn't say let's open up Robert's book.
So he.
God says, look at my Jews. One's caring for another.
Right.
All right. So maybe that's what's happening here.
So he had not
Perhaps.
yet been in the world to come, or he would be yanked out of it.
So I don't know where he is in the state. Like, where is he? Is he in the world to come?
I mean,
being
this has
yanked?
happened so many
I don't know.
thousands or whatever years later.
That's another good question. I don't know. Where is King Solomon at this point?
Holding pattern somewhere.
Is he a whole? Yeah, maybe he's in. I don't know.
Could be, or maybe not in the right level for his status. There's such an idea that.
Or maybe his cleansing would have ended at that point. I can't. I don't know. That's a good question. There's lots of interesting questions to be thinking about in this Gemara, but it's definitely a very fascinating one. Okay, wonderful day, everybody.
Right, thanks.